Hello, and welcome to the Quietly Visible podcast. I'm your host, Carol Stewart, founder of Debunking Solutions and author of Quietly Visible, Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman. And this is the podcast for introverted women who want to thrive as leaders and in line. And today I've got with me a very interesting person, and her name is Sandra Stocks. And she is a motivational speaker, inspirational speaker who speaks on a variety of topics. And she hosts the podcast, Living a Hell Yes. And I love the sound of that because it sounds to me someone who's not conforming to stereotypes, not conforming to what other people say, but that's someone who wants to live their life as themselves, doing their own thing. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And we're going to be talking about that little voice inside of us that we often overlook, that we don't often listen to, that is telling us the right way to go, the right things to do, rather that we operate from a place of fear and what other people think, and we take a lot of that into consideration before we make our decisions. So I'm looking at unpacking that with Sandra. So hello, Sandra, and welcome.
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's lovely to see you.
It's great to have you here. So before we start to pick our topic, tell us, who is Sandra? Tell us about you and what you do.
Oh, um, well, a big passion of mine is authenticity. So that comes from life experience. I think a lot of what we do in life experiences then colours what we do moving forward, whether positively or not. So authenticity is big for me. Working with energy is big for me. I've been doing that for 30 years, knowing how energy has a massive impact on what we put out and what we receive. And that's why authenticity is so important, because when you put out an authentic energy, you probably know this from yourself, Carol, with people you meet, even if you're at a party, if you feel that they're not being themselves, you can pick up on it.
Mm-hmm.
And in life, if people don't feel free to be authentic, what tends to happen then is it starts to build up distrust, because you kind of unconsciously become aware that you're not sure that you can trust that person. You don't kind of unpack it like that, but you have a kind of distance from that person because you know something's not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many people live their lives like that. And it's really important to me that people live their lives with a could instead of a should. If I could, genuinely, if I could take away the word should from the English dictionary, I would, because I think should takes us away from who we truly are and how we can display ourselves in life truthfully, honestly, and still get results by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And just having a clear identity of ourselves, feeling really comfortable within our value system, within that identity, and not trying to constantly maneuver it to fit in with what we believe we have to do. Because that causes stress, anxiety, fear, and you're on shaky ground all the time when you do that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that authenticity piece is something that I do a lot of work around, because one of the things with many introverted women, because of how introversion is often viewed less favorably, they feel that they have to put on a persona and act in ways that are not authentic. And as you say, that um, that has a sort of like a multi sort of pronged results in that when it comes to building trust, as you said, people will pick up on that, and it leads to that mistrust. And the other thing is the impact it has on their self-confidence and the stress levels, because gradually it just chips away at their stress levels, and
Yeah.
then sorry, their confidence levels it strips away at, and their stress levels, because it's
Yeah.
stressful, and it affects their confidence.
Yeah, because unconsciously, when they're being somebody they're not, you, not only does it chip away at the confidence, but eventually you've got this unconscious voice saying to you, you're not good enough unless you do it this way. And gosh, that's just not true. And it's so interesting that in David Lappin's book, which is Lead by Greatness, he did research on the top 10 traits of successful leaders around the world. This was a few years ago. And the number one trait that was the most important was authenticity.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people trusted the leader because they knew that that person was who they are, who they were. It's not just about speaking their truth. They resonated because they knew that person was who they were portraying who they truly are.
Yeah. And how did you get to this place of, have you always sort of felt that you could be authentic, or was there a time
God,
when
no.
how did you get to that place of authenticity?
Carol, oh my goodness me. Okay, this is the story. So so gosh, this takes me, I was 15 when I started going out with a boy, and he was a Sri Lankan Londoner. That's relevant to the story. And we got engaged at 19 to go on holiday because we couldn't go on holiday unless we were engaged. And now this is very different to my parents that said, I don't understand why you're getting engaged to go on holiday, but okay, we'll support you, kind of thing, if you really want to do that. And then we did live together from the age of 23, but with the Sri Lankan community, within, a short space of time, it was, you can't do that for much longer unless you get married. So it became a should. And I had, up to that point, lived my life people pleasing, which I think also comes from should, duty or confidence, lots of different things with people pleasing. There's so many different layers. And this is honestly true. I actually slept with my mum and dad the night before the wedding because I knew I didn't want to do it. And we by that time we were school children when we started going out. Now we're 26 and it's just not, it's not the thing. And my parents, though, bless them, had taken out a loan for the wedding. So when I went downstairs that morning of the wedding, my mum, without me even saying anything, said, you don't have to do this, So I said, well, I don't know what you're speaking about, Mum. I don't know what you're talking about. So this is truth. This is honestly the truth. I walked down the aisle thinking, who's going to rescue me? Honestly true. And you know that bit in the ceremony when they say, put your hand up if there's anybody that has an objection to this wedding. I actually thought, who's going to put their hand up? Is somebody going to put their hand up? And I went through with it, and we were divorced a year later. And that was an absolute should. That was a completely inauthentic thing. That obviously spoke also about self-worth. And what's incredibly interesting about the self-worth, and I do think stuff is reflected back to us, depending on what we do or say. And that's what I said earlier about the energy you put out, that kind of thing. While we were having our wedding photograph taken, my new husband said to me, whispered in my ear, I thought you'd look better than that. Honestly, true story. And you think, well, okay, well, gosh, if I didn't know before, I know now. And that was a big learning. That was a big lesson. It was how far, Sandra, genuinely, how far do you need it to go before you actually start speaking up for stuff that actually feels right for you? Because what had happened was I was just on the snowball. I wanted to help his parents feel good. I blessed my parents for taking out the loan. I felt bad for that. There were so many things that were all in the mix that yeah, I just thought, gosh, you know what, to compromise myself, not that I even worded it this way back then,
Yeah.
but to compromise myself would be the best way right here, right now. And
Mm-hmm.
now with the work I do, that's just, no, you have to say yes to you first, and then you can say yes to others.
Yeah.
Um,
And sort of that just sort of leads us nicely into the topic of our conversation, listening to that little voice,
yeah.
and going with that rather than pleasing people. Um, at what point in that journey would you say that that little voice was telling you, no, don't do it, don't do it, that you chose to, as you said, people please?
Oh gosh, in that journey, Carol, before we even got engaged to go on holiday.
Yeah.
Because it was I wouldn't you know, it's not my thing really to get engaged
Mhm.
and not even really to get married, but no, I would just, freedom is one of my top values, and it would just be, no, you can go on holiday. Freedom
Mhm.
to go on holiday.
Mhm.
So I really, that inner quiet voice that I hadn't cultivated properly then,
Mhm.
which now is much stronger within me, and we have to cultivate it, you know, because we are busy. Life is speeding up like there's no tomorrow. There's so much stuff going on in the world that we don't have that. I don't believe most of us give ourselves that quiet time to go quiet
Yeah.
and to listen. And back then, I certainly did. I knew something like that voice was saying to me, somebody put their hand up and object.
Mhm. Yeah.
But by that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
so
Yeah, yeah, and it's very interesting that because I know many of us, and I've sort of, when I look back over my life, have been guilty of that. You know, you have that little voice saying, "No, don't do that,"
yeah,
but you still go ahead. Sometimes it's because of fear of letting someone down, concern
yeah,
about how you will be viewed, or other things.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
uh-huh.
it's a real shame, isn't it? Because, up to the age of 5, roughly, up to the age of 5, you don't do that. You do what you want, and
Hmm.
that's why parents get cross with their children, right? Because the children, they just want to do what they want to do, and that's their, in their eyes, and they probably wouldn't say this, but that's their God-given right. I can do what I want to do, and you'll
Hmm.
be okay with it in the end. You might not be happy with me right here, right now, but in the end, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
But we don't come from that. After that, we kind of then close down to that because we're taking in those belief systems, as you know, from peers and from people in the playground and our own parents and our own
Hmm.
teachers and stuff like that, who are doing their best. But it means that we do lose the authentic us, because we've then moved into that whole thing of people pleasing and wanting to make things as easy as possible for other people, but really making it very difficult for us.
Yeah, yes, and it's that that fear. Well, I guess there's a few things at play there. That wanting to be approved, wanting approval
Sure.
from other people, wanting to be accepted, wanting to belong, not wanting to be cast out, so to speak.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's
Mm-hmm.
that whole thing, especially, in leadership, and how difficult is it, especially in today's, with so much stuff going on. It's hard to raise your head above the parapet,
Mm-hmm.
to actually want to put yourself out there to be authentic, because there are so many other factors at play. And people want to keep their jobs, and people want, they need their income coming in, that it's like, well, gosh, really, if I stood up and actually said what felt right to me, what would that mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's kind of like, well, what about if we started a movement? What about if we did start to gently be authentic? And we don't have to be strident with it. It can be the small ways of being authentic and speaking our truth in a very gentle way. Research has shown, hasn't it, that um, a message that we give through verbal is only 7% words. The rest of it is conveyed by body language and tone. So we don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be strident with what we're saying, but even just small steps towards even just no, I don't really like that. I'd prefer that. That's gentle, but it starts the wheels in motion.
Yeah, and that that people pleasing element is, I think a lot of people are, a lot of women are doing that, but not even realize that that is what they're doing.
For sure. For sure.
Mm.
People pleasing.
Yeah,
For sure. For sure.
yeah.
And we take on identities, don't we? And we then try to, within the space of maybe even 2 or 3 minutes, we try and fit every identity we've got going on. You know, if we're a mother, we're then there, but within that mother, we might be trying to be a peacemaker. So we'll try and do that within that as well. And then we'll try to, if we've got a partner at that time as well, we'll try and be the best partner that we can be at that point when that's all happening. And then we'll also try to be a good employee or a good leader if we're working a bit further on down the line that day. And it's just, we have so much that we're juggling that I truly believe we make an unconscious decision to put ourselves down the line. And it becomes, which is quite sad, it becomes easier to just be the identities that we've adopted because it's easier, it's practice.
Yeah.
Whereas us being like kind of, I don't, really wouldn't want that. Ideally, I don't want that kind of thing. Being authentic, that's not as easy.
No, no. And so after your marriage experience,
Mm.
that experience, how easy or not was it for you to then listen to what it is that you really wanted, as opposed to doing what everybody else wanted you to do? Or did you have to have other
Well,
experiences before it actually dropped?
um, I would say that was probably the most, the one that I'd had quite a few leading up to that point. So I would say that was the one that was the prime one that took me into a space of, God, I really want to start saying yes to me. That caused issues though. So I then was in a relationship with somebody I loved very much, had my daughter with him, and he was mentally unwell, which I didn't know at the time. But so that caused a lot of issues with my family. So that was very difficult for me because that was me standing true in my authentic, what I wanted. And for the first time, probably ever, that was a no to them. And, I was in their eyes, not mine, a bit of a blue-eyed girl and all that kind of thing. Well, now I was doing the exact opposite. So that sometimes being authentic, we know this, people won't like that. But what's so interesting about the human race, and we don't give them credit for this, is they'll eventually get used to a new paradigm. If we stay true to that paradigm, and if we're coming from an intention that's a good intention, you want to come from a good intention. So for me, it was hoping that in time they would get used to this, especially as they had a grandchild. So it did. It took time, took a lot of time. I'm not saying it completely healed, but it was an example of, well, this is definitely, I know this is what I want, and I'm going to do it with as much love as I can. But of course, it wasn't an easy journey. But then what do you do, right? If you're inauthentic, it's not an easy journey. And then when you choose authenticity, that doesn't feel an easy journey. And it's just finding your feet, isn't it? Because once you become very clear about what you want and you try and then create that with love and that kind of thing, you can take small steps towards it, and let that become the norm, let that become the practice behavior, and then it becomes a bit easier, and then people kind of expect that of you then, and then that makes it all easier.
And so how do people go about listening to that inner voice, that instinct that's guiding them, and stop that people pleasing so that they can be their authentic selves.
It's so interesting you just asked the question the way you did. So I'm going to kind of turn it on its head, if that's okay, because I think we'll get the clearer. I'm hoping we'll get it. I'll be able to answer it clearer. So I think you said what stops people listening to that inner voice.
And how do they go about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's more about how do we get them, or how do I get them to start listening, because they know it's there, right? And it's what, how do they actually start? They know it's there. Because how many times do you hear people say, oh, my gut told me that, or my instinct told me that, and what did you do? What did you do then with that? No, then I thought about it, and then I did something else. You know, like me with the wedding. That's exactly it, right? I knew but was I going to start to listen to it? No. Did I listen to my brain instead? Yes. You've always got those two things going on. You've got that inner voice that really comes from your guidance, that larger part of you that's connected to your spirit, your soul, whatever, whichever way you want to call it. But I think, you know, well, physics has proven that we are more than this physical body. We're in energy, right? So it's connected to all of that energy that surrounds us, and it knows your highest good. It knows it, and that's the gut instinct. But then your brain kicks in pretty quickly with, no, let's just keep you safe, and we want to keep you in your comfort zone, and, you know, let me then thread through very quickly, within seconds actually, some thoughts that are going to sabotage you moving forward on that. So I'll tell you you're not good enough, and I'll tell you that this is the way it's always been. I'll tell you that nobody will like you doing that, or anything at all. And mainly to your Achilles heel, whatever the Achilles heel is, the brain will drive those messages through. So really, the way to ideally do it is that feeling, that burst, that knowing, either a no or a yes, but it's a clear no. I've got that feeling, I can feel it. So if it's something, say you've got a new project and somebody's come to you with this new project and you feel real excitement, right? That's your initial response. That's real excitement. But the brain will come in quite quickly with why you shouldn't or couldn't be doing it. So what I say to people is, what I'd love you to do when ideas come to you, when actions come to you, when you want to move forward, always the brain is going to come in and it's going to keep you in your comfort zone. I want you to go back to the initial feeling you felt when that idea came in. Whether it's an action you want to take or not take, you'll be guided either way. But how did you feel when? So if somebody had said to me back in that day, like my mum did, but if it wasn't my mum, who, bless her, had placed alone, but I don't know, just with what I know now, and I didn't know that then, but hindsight is a massive superpower, isn't it, that we don't have. But if I knew what I knew now back then, I would have taken notice of the feeling of dread in me, and the feeling of anxiety and the feeling of stress. And I would have taken notice of the emotional feeling. And with what I know now, I would have had to have been in that place of discomfort of calling off the wedding.
Yeah.
And I know I would have felt uncomfortable. That wouldn't have been a happy place to be in either. But I know in the end, that guided feeling would have got me to the right place for me. We're all unique, right? But for me. And with projects, if I feel really excited about it, and then the brain comes in with, you've not done that before. How are you going to be doing that then? I don't think you can. You've never done it. No, I don't think so. I'll go back to the excited feeling of how I felt, and I will then think, come on, there's always a way. There's always a way. And that's with what I know now, that your feeling is your guidance. But it takes courage to move on that when you've got people pleasing going on, or comparison is a big one as well, or other people's expectations. That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Yes, other people's expectations, that is a big one. And also I think other people putting their fears onto you or onto us,
Yeah,
that we then absorb that, take that on board when it's
yeah,
actually their fears, not ours.
exactly. And it's as if then, and remember, those people that are fearful, they do have the choice to change that fear.
Mm-hmm.
But they do. They have the chance to do that. But we just take it on if we want to help them. We think, okay, if I take their fear on and I act in a way that makes them feel a bit happier, then that's the solution. But it's not, because it disempowers them, because we're not giving them the chance to step into their own choices and their own
Mm-hmm.
empowerment. And at the same time, we disempower ours. And I think one of the big shifts for me was I was reading a book called The Top Five Regrets of the Dying. And
Yeah.
it was written by a hospice nurse in Australia, actually. And the number one regret of the dying, you would think people were working too long or working too hard. The number one regret was living life to other people's expectations and not their own.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a biggie for me, because that was, well, you're done then, right? Because you're at this is also people at the end of their life, obviously, they're at hospices, and your life is done, and you didn't live your life. And I don't, my job, what happened at that point for me was, it was almost a mission then at that point. It was no, 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 no. I want, if I can do anything to help people live their life that's true to them,
Mm-hmm.
and if I can support the letting go of the fear around that, then yeah, that's got to be part of my calling.
Yeah. And that is quite powerful, that having that realization that you're doing something for yourself as opposed to what is expected or what other people are saying you should be doing. Mm,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And as we were saying, about authenticity being the number one trait of great leaders, when you think about it, how can we, like we see this in politics all the time, not that I'm going to get political, but nobody trusts politicians, right? As an example, right?
Mhm,
Why? Well, because they're not being themselves, are they?
mhm,
They're going to tell you what they want to tell you and be who they want to be at that point. But that's just a prime example
mhm.
of, it's a different ball game if you're being true to you. And as I say, you don't have to go to A to Z in a leap, but it's those small steps that
Yeah.
start to lead to you being authentic. And then your power, then power of influence, but positive power of influence. I'm not talking about power as power, but your positive power of influence becomes so much greater. And
Mhm.
so the ripple effect is huge. And
Yeah.
then we can
And
maybe make a change.
yeah, and speaking of politicians, a good example that I always use when I'm sort of doing workshops and talks on being your authentic self is Theresa May, the former Prime Minister.
Yeah,
And I remember at the last party conference, the Conservative talk party conference, she came on the stage. She's introverted, and she came on the stage like this, dancing to ABBA's Dancing Queen, and I cringed. I don't know if you saw
yeah,
that at all. I
yeah.
cringed because she just
That,
looked so
so
inauthentic,
yes, there
and
we go.
and it made me feel uncomfortable watching her. And I thought, whoever advised her to do that, because it just looked inauthentic. And as you said, when people are inauthentic, it creates that mistrust.
And it
And
does.
I think the most authentic I saw her was when she was doing her exit speech outside 10 Downing Street, when she was after she'd stood down, and she just looked authentic. She looked her natural self. It was that she was radiating this
Mhm.
authenticity. And I thought to
Yeah,
myself, why hadn't she been like that throughout
yeah,
her time as Prime Minister? Rather than,
yeah,
she probably had advisors telling her to do this because that's what the public want to see.
yeah.
Um, but I think if she'd just been her authentic self, her experience may have been very different.
And I really believe that. I do believe our experiences, yes, as I say, they could be tricky because you're being authentic to you, and as we just said, your other people's expectations may then, be a bit fearful for you. But once you become authentic, what you create in your life becomes a true reflection of you. And that's got, I really believe that your authenticity is your most valuable asset. I really believe that. You then stand in the clear place of who you are, and it's the only thing you have of any value, really, because it's you.
Yeah, and that's something that I can testify to, because sort of as a sort of teenager, early 20s, I didn't feel that I could be who I was. Don't think I probably really knew who I was.
Yeah.
And then it was more so as I matured that I really began to understand who I was and accepted myself as I was, and wanted to be my authentic self. And once I was being my authentic self, then that gave me a new level of confidence, and also a new level of wanting to use what skills and talents that I'd got to make my impact in the world and to make a difference in the world as being my authentic self. And now I don't want to be anything but my authentic self.
Yeah, absolutely. And doesn't it make life, now that you've committed to that, and you've had some years of practice of that, doesn't it make life easier?
It
As
does, it really
well?
does. Yeah.
It streamlines it. You are who you are. People know who you are, and it's you're not showing up as somebody else, and there's not that stress, like we said before, and there's not that pressure. And yeah, I love that. I just absolutely love that. And yes, sometimes we don't know who we are, and that does take years. And
Yeah.
do we ever fully know? I do think we're always evolving. So we're not always fully aware of all of who we are, but we know who we are in the moment. And it's having the courage, and I'm not saying it doesn't take courage, it's having the courage to step into that and kind of putting out a vibe of, this is who I am,
Yeah.
and it is good enough.
Yeah.
And and that really, I think a lot of some of the work, well, a lot of the work I do is wrapped up in self-worth, because if you don't feel this love for yourself and this worthiness of you, of self, it is easier to put on an identity.
Yeah. And I think, as painful as it may be initially, the pain of going through that process of becoming your authentic self far outweighs living a life of inauthenticity, I think.
Oh my God, completely, Carol. I mean, when you do go back to that book and knowing that's the number one regret of living life to other people's expectations, that's the biggest regret. And she interviewed hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah, you want to, that's exactly it, Carol. It's uncomfortable. Anything that we do that's outside of our comfort zone is uncomfortable. And it's kind of like, how can I feel comfortable with the discomfort?
Yeah.
And if you can kind of break through that, I'm okay, I'm hands up, I'm going to have to deal with the feeling uncomfortable with the discomfort, and I'm going to feel comfortable, sorry, with the discomfort, and I'm just going to have to get used to feeling comfortable with the discomfort. You kind of help yourself move forward then, because how you're going to be feeling, but that's okay. No change, no growth can ever come from comfort.
No, that's right. And I often sort of coach women who have maybe in their 40s, even 50s, who've gone down a path that was expected of them. Maybe their parents wanted them to choose a particular career, or there was pressure on them to go a particular route. And it's got to a stage in their lives where they're just so unfulfilled, and they're stressed, they're dissatisfied, and they know that if they carry on like that, well, they know that they can't carry on like that, so they want to make a change. But then they've got, like, sometimes they've got years of, or sometimes I've even had people who have been in their 40s late 40s, worried about what their parents will think if they choose to go a different path, what was expected of them. But then when they have done that, it's been liberating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know I have people the same who have taken on the corporate identity of what they've done for decades. And now it's like, oh my gosh, I'm close to retirement. And that's a massive transition then, because I don't know who I am. Because I fitted this, I fitted into this. So I've molded myself into this. What do I do now? Who am I now? And it's so interesting. I work with young people from around the world. You know, they come to a week's training, and I support them in training to be authentic and successful leaders. And obviously they have their own cultures with their own beliefs, and they have their chaperones with them as well. And I'm there in the training room saying, you know, your values are your most important thing. Your beliefs come from parents, cultures, all of that, which is completely understandable. We all take on beliefs, don't we? But it's your values. Your values match your beliefs, probably unlikely. And there I am challenging the very cultural beliefs, I guess, to a certain extent, but their beliefs that they've taken on with their chaperones right there as well from their country, who are adults and who are, you know, and bless them, they come up to me at the end, Sandra, I loved that. I loved it. And you think, people are ready. I'm not saying everybody, we can't ever but some people can hear the truth of, yes, there's more than just the slotting in to the belief systems around us. But as I say, it takes courage. It takes courage to move out of that. But you can't be authentic and live in somebody else's belief systems that don't resonate with you at the same time. And that's what I did for that time leading up to the wedding.
What wonderful discussion this is. It's something which is a topic that I love to talk about, but we can't talk forever. So just tell us quickly about the podcast, Living a Hell Yes.
Living a Hell Yes.
Okay. Where did that title come from?
Okay. Oh, it was me actually. I just thought, you know, we're all here. We've got to live a hell yes. You know, what does that mean? I don't know, because we're all unique with our hell yeses. What does your hell yes mean to you? If I said to you, what does living a hell yes mean to you? Maybe you wouldn't even know right here, right now, what would a hell yes mean? And again, we don't give ourselves enough time, and we shut it down straight away by thinking we can't do it anyway. And it was during COVID, actually, during lockdown, and I do the podcast with my daughter, who's an adult herself and in corporate. And she was having a bit of a tough time during COVID and lockdown, like a lot of people did. And I just had this light bulb moment and that feeling that this is exciting. And I just said to her, oh, her name's Polly. I said, oh, how do you fancy doing a podcast together? You know, and she said, oh, Mum, that's a really good idea. On what? What would we be talking, you know, what would we be speaking about? So I said, well, what about living a hell yes? You know, because right here, right now, the world is a very different place. People certainly aren't living a hell yes, and they're living in fear and worry and stress and anxiety. And what about if we kind of broke down beliefs in our podcast episode of, firstly, what is somebody's hell yes? That could be an episode. What is your hell yes? What stops you? What are the beliefs we have? And it just went on and on and on. I think we're in our third season now, and it's just it's lovely because it comes from two generational viewpoints. And it's very much like us having this conversation. So none of it is scripted. She calls me out on stuff, you know, like mum and all this kind of stuff. You know, you can't say that. And yes, I can. And so it's very much about the way we interact as well. But it challenges and it supports people, I'm hoping, to break down their own barriers of living their hell yes. And supporting them to do that in different ways. Like she comes very good. She's very articulate, and she speaks very well as an example about social media, because for her generation, social media is the thing. And for her, she finds comparison on social media as an example not living a hell yes. That's just not a hell yes. And she, it does. It brings its own pressures and its own stresses. That's just an example of the kind of thing we would speak about. Yeah, but it's
sounds interesting,
always
listeners.
always with the intention that people find something useful from it to help them to live their hell yes.
Yeah. So listeners, go and check out the podcast, Living Your Hell Yes. So this has been a very lovely discussion. I've really enjoyed it, Sandra. So if people want to find out more about you and your work, where's the best place for them to go?
Probably my website, which actually I'm redoing, but www.sandrastocks.co.uk. I'm on Instagram at Sandra Stocks Coach. The Live in a Hell Yes podcast. I wrote a #1 bestseller with a colleague of mine called 16 Seconds, Debunking the Myth Surrounding Manifestation. So that's out there as well, which gives some insight into me. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Facebook. So that's kind of some places to get to know me. But yeah.
Well, thank you. So listeners, do check out the podcast, find Sandra on social media, and go and look for her book as well. So it's been great having you, Sandra. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Carol, I've loved it. Thank you so much for having me. Really lovely to speak to you. Thank you.
Yeah, good. You're welcome. So thank you for listening, everyone. And as I said, do go and check Sandra out, her website, her book, social media platforms. And if you are wanting to increase your confidence, influence, and impact, if you haven't completed the free assessment on my website, go to aboudingsolutions.com. Under the free resources, there's an assessment that you can complete that will give you ideas about areas to focus on. And so until the next time, bye.